Like you need those pieces of paper. But you're it.
So folks, welcome. It's 1 o'clock. Welcome to Councillor Wang, who I think has joined us online. Just confirming that this meeting, that the meeting has been live streamed, and could folks please turn off their mobile phones. We'll work through the agenda. We may take a break. We'll just see how we're going. And just confirming with respect to the agenda, the item with respect to audit, I think audit is joining us at 2 o'clock, so we may need to move the agenda around. But in respect to that, can I move to item 1 in terms of the opening karakia and invite Councillor Waru to open the meeting for us, please.
Tēnā tātou katoa. Ra tū tawa mai, runga tū tawa mai, raro tū tawa mai, roto tū tawa mai waho. Ia tau wai te mauri ora ki te katoa haungi e hui e tāiki. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you. Just move to item 2, which is apologies. Can I call for apologies? I think we've got a couple for lateness.
We're all here.
Okay.
No.
So we'll just note Councillor Brown for lateness apart from that. So do we need a mover for that? We'll just note that. Okay, that's fine. Declarations of interest, item 3, so that's been previously circulated as a separate document, so we'll just note that. Just calling, are there any urgent items that aren't on the agenda, on the papers in front of us? If not, we can move into agenda item 5, which is the minutes of the Audit and Risk Committee meeting held on 25 March 2024. So can I have a mover and a seconder that the minutes of the Audit and Risk Committee held on 25 March 24 be confirmed as a true and correct record? Have a mover? Councillor Kaufong, seconded by Committee Member Henderson. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. We'll confirm that is approved. In that regard, we move to item 6, which is the action register. Andrew, does somebody want to take us through? Oh, sorry, apologies. Yeah. Can I have a mover and seconder that the report for the action register be received? Councillor Barker and Councillor Mayor Tapsell. All those in favour, please say aye. 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 We'll take that as confirmed. So that paper is in front of us. One of the items that I think we've discussed is once items have been reported as being completed, we can take those off the list. Do we want to work through that list or just take questions just through the CE? How do you want to play this?
Just any questions.
Any questions? So, Mayor Tapsell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. Question or just an update on there on page 18 is the $10 million of funding regarding the Rotorua Sewage Reticulation Scheme. Just the morning of the LTP, when we adopted it, we did have confirmation verbal confirmation from Ministry for Environment that 10 million will be received, and I understand that there are just some details that are being worked through at the moment. So just an update on that, which obviously is quite significant to the funding of that scheme. So we do anticipate to receive the $10 million from Ministry for Environment.
Thank you, Mayor Tanya. So in that respect, can we take that item as completed and take it off, or do you still want that to retain there for visibility?
We could note that as complete now. Yes.
Note that is complete.
Yeah, because that was just specifically regarding the decision on whether we'd receive it or not, which we have. So yeah, complete.
Cool.
Sorry, Chair, just on that point, yes, we've got the question around the decision, but I don't think the funding has actually been confirmed in terms of its conditions, if I can call them that.
I'll just ask the CE to respond to that.
Thank you. Oh, it's not a Madam Chair, sorry. Thank you, Chair. Through you, that's correct, that the terms rather than the conditions of the loan are still being worked through. But as the Mayor mentioned, in principle, we're reasonably satisfied we have that funding allocated to it, and that was the action point. So on that basis, I'd support that it's what's written there is substantially.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Just a question from me. So one of the actions was a post-implementation review of the One Council IT project. So that's listed there as ongoing with the action. So, and perhaps that's a matter that can be addressed in terms of where we look at the work program and look out over the next year. So at some point, just flag that, just be keen to understand that. And just also keen just with respect to the museum project, and maybe we can talk about that later under the risk section in terms of what role this committee will or won't have in respect of that project. So those are two items on that. That's all I had. If there's nothing else, we'll take the action register as confirmed. And in that regard, we can move to item 6.2. Can I have a mover and seconder that the report, Audit and Risk Committee draft work program be received? Moved by Councillor Waru, seconded by Councillor Wang. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye, we'll take that as confirmed. Andrew, is anyone from the team going to talk to that? Is Thomas, you going to talk to that? Oh, the draft work program for the committee? No? So, and thanks to staff, so effectively a bit of a format change there, just noting items that have been completed, items ticked and read haven't been, so referring to my comment before, presumably when we look at the program going forward, we'll reschedule those items. Sorry, Thomas. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, I wasn't anticipating presenting on this item, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, so Mayor Tapsell.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to note that this is quite a dated work program from July 23 to December 24. So happy to just note that this is, or is that incorrect? Okay.
I think you are raising a good point that it's probably time that offline work with the CE and Thomas to update that. Yeah. And I think certainly when we talk later in terms of the risk report, that'll flavour our thinking as well. So it's timely to have an action that we report back a 12-month program going forward to the next meeting. I'm getting nods from the CE, so I think that'll address your issue. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. Just noticed that there's an internal audit being proposed for the Rotorua scheme. Can anyone answer if that's happening or is in progress or where it's at, please?
Yes, so I can speak to that, yep. Councillor Barker. So I believe that is as we've just discussed, a bit of a legacy item on that, on this work program. There's an internal audit of sorts done by myself as a review of that scheme. There's now discussions around whether it's appropriate to do an external audit on that project, but we're working through what the implications of that might be. So we'll update the work program to indicate what we're actually intending to do.
Thank you. There was some interest in the learnings from that, any review to take forward into the other programs.
Certainly.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Other questions? So just a couple of items for me to add when we're doing that work in terms of the work program. We should just add in terms of the LTP, the management letter. So we'll put that on the agenda in terms of that report from audit. And in terms of the annual report process, keen just for a paper, just in terms of the key accounting assumptions that are going into the annual report. Yep. If there are no other questions, we'll take that item as confirmed. So on that basis, we can move to item 6.3. Can I have a mover and a seconder that the report enterprise risk report be received? Moved by Councillor Carfong and seconded by Councillor Tapsell, Mayor Tapsell, thank you. So that's on page 22, and I think Aaron's going to join us. And I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. And that's confirmed.
Kia ora, Councillor, thank you. So I'll take the report as read. We do have a slide to go over the categories, but if there are any questions on the report, I'm happy to field any questions first.
So not so much a question, but I'm keen that the committee goes through the new risk categories, which I think on page 36. Is that something you're going to present on, or you just want to?
Yeah, I do have just a slide to just briefly go over those. I just wondered if anyone had any questions on the actual report itself before we got to that item.
So from my perspective, Elron, so the one question I had was just with respect to your summary of the risk table, just in terms of just trying to find my page number here. So on page where you summarise 177 risks, you've got in terms of extreme risks, there are 7 new extreme risks that have appeared, and in terms of residual high risks, they've gone from 20 to 23. So just wondering if you could just talk to the committee with respect to what are those factors that are sitting in that change or driving that change.
Yes, absolutely. So those 7 extreme risks, and again, it's worth just reiterating that they are.
No.
Sorry.
Can you change mics over? We're just.
Yeah, sure. Is that better?
Perfect.
There we go.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, so, sorry, so to answer that, the 7 risks, they aren't all brand new risks. Some of them are risks that have been rescored since we've adopted the LTP and got more data, so we've had to re-baseline those. In terms of the new risks that we've identified, thank you, Rob, those are more about some issues that we've faced over the last reporting period, including physical security, some health and safety mitigations from facilities, and out-of-hours emergencies services for our regulatory section, and some issues around how the council manages and stores firearms. So obviously those are all quite high-risk items, but they all have mitigations in place to actually reduce that on the residual. For the other ones where the movement was, the bulk of them actually do sit in my area under PMO and risk, and that's around how we resource and manage our projects. We've gone into the new LTP. There are a greater number of high value projects, so that increases the raw risk. So, the more, high risk infrastructure, high value projects we have, the raw risk associated with those are greater. So, but again, we have mitigations in place to bring those down, and that's being worked through currently with the new chief executive.
Thanks, Aaron. Is it worthwhile now, Andrew, just briefly talking to that, particularly that capital delivery one, in terms of that's been flagged in terms of our key risk category, and in terms of this, in terms of actions you're taking in place to manage that key risk for the organisation?
Thank you, through the chair. So as Elron has indicated, Elron's led a piece of work that has been brought to the executive team and been approved by the executive team around a streamlined framework for project management of all projects, but starting with the key high-risk projects, and that which projects fall into that category was well and robustly discussed. So actually it includes the museum, includes the main wastewater treatment plant, the 2 sewage schemes that we've talked about, and the IAF program of works, the stormwater program of works. So and this touches on another one of your questions earlier, Chair, about what's the role of this committee at the moment. Those are being reported through to the Infrastructure and Environment Committee as the committee with the delegations to look over our capital projects. So that reporting has commenced. It's starting with the museum first in the next meeting, and then we'll roll on to the next 5. The intention is that as that work becomes more embedded in the organisation, that framework gets rolled out to the next few projects on the list. So that's one aspect of the work, and the second aspect of the work, which I have kicked off through the organisation, which is around allocation of resources and the intention to develop more in-house project management capability, with the intention that lessons learned are held within the organisation and build up our IP rather than that just sitting with external consultants.
Thanks, Andrew. So just picking up that point of the role of this committee, so certainly you've got the delivery and project updates going to another committee. I guess this committee's role will be to gain assurance that project management and project risks, the system, are adequately being managed. So when we talk about the work program, maybe we could factor that into. So certainly don't want to duplicate reporting, but I guess this committee should have an overview and sort of be able to sort of get confidence that the controls are in place with respect to those areas, yeah?
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Chair, we'll maybe take that as an action for the next committee meeting to present the framework that's been adopted and get this committee's overview of it.
Okay, no, thank you. I've got Committee Member Henderson. I was going to call you Councillor, but I don't think that's right, sorry.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you. Just on the go forward in relation to those 5 projects that are being identified for deep dive assessment, are there any that would materially or singularly be material enough to be considered a risk that warrants an ongoing action item in relation to audit and risk?
Thank you, Member Henderson. I don't.
It's fine.
Let me reflect on that, but at this point, I don't see that as being yes. So I believe that the framework is the appropriate level for this committee to overview those projects, and as part of the framework is a cadence of reporting that is through to I&E, Infrastructure and Environment Committee. And if this committee is comfortable with the framework, then any risks that change should flash up to that committee and give governors that platform to review the projects themselves.
Thanks, Andrew. Do we have other questions for Councillor Barker?
Just a quick question on reporting on page 27, the volume by risk category. I notice there's about 9 categories in that pie graph. Is that based on the previous set of criteria that we had, not the new ones that have been proposed for adoption? Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
We're currently still working to the existing framework until the committee's reviewed and adopted those settings, and then we'll recalibrate our systems to the new categories that we've agreed.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Just one question from me. It's bottom of page 27, so the specific risk around failure to meet statutory obligations. The raw risk is extreme. The residual risk is still high risk, but I note in terms of the risk action plan, it says complete, which implies to me that the mitigations are all in place, but the risk is still high. But then there's pending reviews. Just wanted to understand what that actually meant.
Yeah, so this is something that we implemented about 2 months ago now. So one of the challenges that we had was identifying where we currently are, because on paper, on a risk assessment, you've got your raw risk, your residual risk, or where are we now? So then we started tagging the status of the action plan. And we just wanted to add an extra layer of assurance that once those plans were marked as complete, that we actually now do a further check. So I have a quality assurance manager on my team, and he actually goes out and sits with the person responsible for that risk, and actually just runs through the mitigations and just ensures that they have actually been carried out, and then has further conversations around whether that risk could be further lowered. So complete from the risk owner's point of view, pending review from a quality assurance point of view.
Okay, thank you. But what I understand is our mitigations are all in place, our action plans have all been completed.
Correct.
But the assessment of the residual risk is still high risk for that particular risk.
Yeah, for that particular risk, you know, it can be to do with this. Sorry.
I guess thank you, Chair, thank you for letting me interrupt you. I guess this is part of a discussion around risk appetite, because if the view of this committee is that a high residual risk is still too high, then that's effectively a discussion around risk appetite. And then we need to understand what more mitigations might be required to lower that risk still further and figure out what the resourcing is for that. So I think we're probably starting to wander into that kind of conversation. So in terms of Elron's answer, I think you're complete, but maybe there's a subsequent discussion around that.
Okay, now that fits quite nicely in terms of our work program. We're going to agree the risk categories and bring back the reporting, but we need to discuss the risk framework, and I think that risk appetite is part of that conversation as well. So, okay, no, that's fine, understood that. Yeah. If there are no more questions, I'll get Elron to take us into the new risk category. So this follows our workshop, I think, in May. Elron, in your hands.
Yes, absolutely. So, thank you, Chair. Following the workshop, we collated all of the feedback and summarised it into a manageable number of categories. So on the left-hand side, you see the existing current categories that we measure that is in the current report. And then going forward, what we're proposing is that we actually broaden those out so that we can take a more targeted look at these areas following the workshop that we did and the feedback that we received from Council. We've reviewed this internally. The Chief Executive is comfortable with these. The plan would then be, if the committee is also comfortable with these new categories, that these be adopted. And what we would then do is actually look at how we report against these going forward. So something that we've been working on is actually risk assessing the categories. So that basically involves capturing all of the risks that sit in those categories, lifting them up to identify if there's any commonality, so the root causes between those, then actually scoring them at a category level just to give the committee a kind of higher level understanding of where the real tension points are for the organisation, rather than expecting you to be across 174 risks, for example, that currently sit on the register. So we haven't completed that work yet, but that's what that graph represents. So each category effectively would be, so if you took each of those numbers as the category, they would sit in that raw area, and then post-mitigation they sit in the residual area, and then the report would break down by category what we're doing about those. I'm happy to answer any questions on that.
So Elron, the detail sits on pages 36 and 37 where those categories, there's flesh on the bone in terms of the description of what that risk category covers and a brief summary of the risk management approach. Yes. So you've done some good work in terms of putting that together. So I'll just pause there and ask if there are any questions with respect to where we've landed in terms of this piece of work. Just want to compliment you, Elron, and Andrew and the team in terms of getting to that point. I think it really allows us to focus on the big picture stuff. Obviously, sitting below that is a lot of detail and a system chasing a whole lot of individual risks, but this will enable this committee to really focus on the big picture stuff. But let me pause and just see if there are any questions in terms of the categories or the descriptions. Councillor Barker?
Thank you, Chair. Probably just a clarification maybe around reputation. That's strongly linked in the definition to stakeholder relationships. Is that the only real area of focus that our reputation is at risk, or should it be a little bit wider? Just a question to the room, really.
Andrew or Elron want to?
Yeah, I can respond to that. Based on the, so obviously under the existing settings, reputation is there, where if you look at the current framework, stakeholder relationships sit in there as well. So we've elevated those up to actually make it more explicit. We could go back and actually separate those out if the committee desired that. It would take us to 12 categories, which wouldn't be the end of the world, but that was the reason for that, just to make, there was a desire from the workshops, one of the flavours that came through was that there was a desire to actually mark that explicitly as part of that group.
Understood, thank you.
That answers your question, Councillor Barker. Yep, thank you. Do we have Deputy Mayor Kaifong?
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if it's a question for Andrew, but some of these look like they have quite big budget lines attached to them if we're to do a lot of this work. Or are we presuming, so for example, on the asset management, we've just come through a discussion around community halls and things like that. So if we're now implementing, or is this is just the mitigation, but we're not necessarily going to have to implement all of these things?
No, so these are so when a area of the business, or sorry, the council creates a risk, they need to tag it against a category type. And these are just the tags that they associate them with. The work is independent of that, and the budget's associated with it separate.
Okay, so not for this meeting, probably a different discussion.
Well, Councillor Kaifong, I think it again speaks to the risk appetite. So they'll, if I take that example around community halls, so if there are a number of risks in that area, and they're identified, and council's appetite to continue to hold those risks is very low, then there will be a very large program of works to eliminate those risks or mitigate those risks. If the appetite's higher, then there'll be a smaller program of work to mitigate those risks. So it will be up to council to make a determination about the risk appetite and therefore the program to mitigate.
So then sorry, Chair, just following on from that, how do we get councils to decide where that their appetite sits in terms of whatever that work program is? Is that an annual plan discussion that this feeds into, or how do we get visibility across that from a councillor's perspective to find their level of, I suppose, suggestion or request or comfort or...
So isn't that when we bring back the detail and actually see where based on the management's assessment of what the current residual risk is based on the current approved budgets and mitigations in place, this is what the residual risk is. And if the residual risk is higher than what councillors wish it to be, then there needs to be a discussion in terms of trade-off, in terms of either putting more budget in to reduce that risk or doing more work, whatever it might be. So that's sort of where this process is going to take us in terms of understanding that trade-off. That's sort of how I see it. I don't know if you want to add to that, Andrew. So one of the things we need to do is at our next meeting, that table up on the right there, understand the criteria that sits behind it. So there's an existing framework in place that, for example, financial risk, there's sort of dollars attached to those. We need to make sure that we're all on the same page as to what we agree is a significant financial dollar level versus a insignificant financial dollar level. So once we do that piece of work, see all the risk summary comes together and where the residual risk sits, then that's, I think, when that conversation, the rubber will hit the road on that conversation, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Chair. So then just following on from that is, how do we then get the councils involved in that process? So are you saying that we continue to do this piece of work through the A&R committee to that point, but then at what point do councillors become involved in? Yeah, I'll let the CEO answer that. That's a good question.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the timing's actually quite good. So if over the next quarter by the next meeting those are approved, it feeds into the annual plan work program, because that's the point at which you would look as councillors at whether you want to readjust the budget levels to respond to these risks. So staff will provide an assessment of where we are now, and then that's your opportunity to say, well, our risk appetite for that is where it is, or we want to shift it higher or lower. So that will feed into the annual plan process.
Sorry, Chair, and then following on from that is just how do we get council's level of understanding to that point, given that we're only dealing with this with councillors that are on the Audit and Risk Committee, and it needs a wider discussion in terms of other councillors' level of understanding, and it was, I think, a good start that we did that piece of work with all of the councillors, but maybe the next piece of work also needs to involve all of the councillors in some way, so that when they come to make those decisions as part of the annual plan, they've actually understood how those decisions came to be made.
So my suggestion would be, once we've got to the point where we've re-looked at the framework and the categorisation and re-looked at where the key risk categories land in terms of the residual risk based on the current resource that's been allocated through the LTP, systems and processes, maybe myself come and present that along with Elron to the wider council, so there's wider understanding of that, because it does link into full council decision making around budget approval. If the council view is an area, the risk level is too high, we need to lower that risk, and the only way to if putting more resources, the only way to lower that, the council needs to understand that. So I think we've got a little bit more work to do as this committee to get to that point where we're ready for it. And I do think that risk appetite conversation, whilst this committee would lead that, at the end of the day, it does require full council sign-off to it.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I think that's probably a good timeline and something to work towards to getting further information out to the councillors.
Thank you. Do I have other... Oh, I think I've got... Sorry, Councillor Wang online. Question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Elron, for the report and for the previous work done to revise this as well. Those 2 pages are really helpful with the detail. The question I have is around, I guess, the creation of these revised categories. I remember the discussion we had was a little bit around, obviously we've picked it apart to really clearly highlight the different, the new categories. But I guess the question is just around, I can kind of still see the little bit of the overlap in a couple of them. I guess it's really in the, I guess the EM and natural hazards categories, and I guess potentially in a couple others. The description and approach in that is clearly outlined, but there was a bit of talk earlier around like subcategories or something like that, and is that something that I guess we would be looking at putting in, or is that kind of a bit too detailed and we want to keep this a bit more high level?
Thank you, Councillor. We wouldn't necessarily have subcategories. We could relook at the categories as a whole as to whether, things that might need to be wrapped up or passed out. But we wouldn't really have subcategories as such, no.
But is it fair to say, Elron, as we go along, we might be able to tweak this a little bit? If there's stuff on the edges between 2, we might tweak the wording to be really clear as to what natural hazards specifically does cover or doesn't cover. So,
absolutely, yeah. And that's really where we want to get to. We want to get this right this time.
So just checking, Councillor Wang, you're happy with that? I think this is going to be a bit of a journey in terms of evolving. It's a really good starting point as we get into it and see the reporting ongoing, where there's areas that you think, hey, there's a crossover here, where is that particular risk sitting, in which category? That conversation can evolve and we can tweak it as required. I'm getting nods from Elron in that respect. So does that satisfy your question? Cool,
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Waru?
Yeah, tēnā koe te Te Awana. Kia ora, everyone. Thank you for the report. Just, I think, sort of already hit on where I was going to hit around the definitions of each of those categories, maybe at a basic level for starters, and then I was glad to hear what you talked about, getting more into that at our next meeting. Perhaps we'll have that information. So I won't go down that track, but I will ask, is there any, might be a bit out of line, but obviously each of those risks are tied to a dollar value of some sort. Is there a weighting system applied to these risks?
Yes, there is. Yeah. So what you're actually
as it's being put up here, I mean.
Well, not just that, there's actually quite a, when you calculate the risk, it's based on those metrics, so the likelihood and the consequence. And then there's actually quite a detailed calculation that goes on beneath that to actually give you the score that sits actually in the table. So that's what we'll need to recalibrate, and then we also need to factor in things, as the Chief Executive mentioned, things like our appetite, and then all of those things form part of the calculation.
Kapai, I thought as such. So that leads me to, if you would indulge me, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, of course.
So the for our current ones that we're doing, current enterprise and risk categories, what is our number one category, I suppose, in terms of weighting?
Not so much a number one category. The things that come out probably most heavily are under people and service, because and this is why we're moving to look at the root causes of some of these categories. So, for example, under the people and service delivery, that impacts things like our capital works program, and that's around staff retention, our frameworks, people's adherence to it, etc., that then also speaks to the council staff turnover, the training we provide, and all of those things, if that makes sense. So as a theme, there's quite a strong theme of root causes in those categories at the moment.
Thank you, Aaron. I only ask because just to start, Councillor or Deputy Mayor Kai Fong's point around bringing in the rest of the councillors into this conversation, and probably that's a good spot to hit. The definitions, and also, why they're weighted in a particular way. I think that would go a long way to clearing some of that thinking up. That's all. Thank you.
Yep.
Andrew?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Warren. And just to add clarification to that, the categories aren't really weighted, but it's the individual risks, I think, is where there's the real value is. So I can understand your questions in terms of, look, every one of those things could have a single risk that's significant, or it could have a single risk that's severe. So I think it's more important, I think, when we get to looking at the risks and you being comfortable that the risks, once you look at them, land at a place that you're happy with the appetite that we've got around them. So, and what the framework will hopefully let us do is apply some objectivity. So when we talk about a financial risk, it's very clear when we say it's insignificant, minor, moderate, major or severe, that's based on specific financial thresholds that have been agreed. So it doesn't become a subjective question of someone says they think this is a major risk financially, and someone else argues that it's not major. We've got those agreed thresholds, and that allow us to have a common language to talk about whether one thing has a more or less severe impact financially, but also in those other categories. So hopefully that will be more real when we have that conversation.
Thanks, Andrew. Do I have any other questions? If not, Aaron, is there anything else you want to cover, or go to the recommendations?
From my point of view, it's mainly about the recommendations,
that's
and then
cool.
we'll move on with the actions.
So in that respect, councillors, just want to add recommendation 4, that's on our papers, that the papers have got number 3, which is that we've approved receiving the report. Secondly, the committee notes the information provided in the report. Third, that the committee provide feedback on the revised framework category settings, which we've had in discussion. But fourthly, a new recommendation that now, having had that discussion, that the committee confirm the framework category settings. So in that regard, can I have a mover for numbers 2, 3 and 4? Councillor Waru, seconded by Deputy Mayor Kai Fong. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Take that as confirmed. Thanks, Aaron, and look forward to the next piece of work in terms of discussing the framework, the criteria and the thresholds that the CE referred to, and then getting on to that appetite conversation.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Council.
Thank you. Okay, councillors, move to item 6.4 on page 38. So can I have a mover and a second that the report Treasury update be received? Moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Waru. All those in favour, please say aye. Take that as confirmed. So welcome Thomas and David. We are in your hands.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. Do you have a brief presentation to bring it up? So within, yeah.
So sorry, it hasn't been sent through, so apologies. So we'll just talk through it.
Sure.
Okay, cool.
So this report covers Council's current Treasury positions as at the end of June 24.
You're a bit quiet, David.
At the end of June 24. If we start with our interest rate risk, on the second page of the report, there is a interest rate risk profile chart, which shows firstly the forecast debt we have in the LTP, and also the maximum and minimum positions we are allowed within our Treasury policy with respect to our fixed and floating debt. Now, what that graph shows us is that we are currently targeting a lower position within that permitted range, so that we're expecting interest rates to taper off towards the end of this calendar year as the Reserve Bank starts its cutting cycle, and we are positioning ourselves as a council to take advantage of that when that takes place. So we currently have a weighted average cost of capital of just about 4.15%, which is marginally below what we had assumed for this current financial year in our long-term plan, and we are expecting to remain within that budget for the financial year. Our overall funding profile shows that the average length of our debt is around 3.8 years. Our Treasury policy encourages us to look within around have a different range of maturity buckets, going out to about 7 years. We are shortening the length of time we are taking out loans, just reflective of the fact that we are expecting markets to change a little bit over the coming years, and we want to be able to retain that flexibility to take on some cheaper debt as we borrow for fresh debt that we have in our long-term plan, and also to refinance the existing debt we have, which will mature over a couple of years. The second aspect of the report I wanted to cover is our funding and liquidity risk timeline. It covers what I briefly mentioned before in terms of how much of our debt we have maturing in any one particular year. So as you mentioned, cash is important to us. We need to make sure that we always maintain enough liquidity to pay for the things we need to pay for. And one aspect of our Treasury policy sort of encourages us to manage is our funding risk. So making sure that out of the $400 million worth of debt we have, that we don't have concentration risk in terms of when those loans mature and having to go out to market, replace those loans and big and we're looking to, as and when those mature, we will approach the market and refinance those loans. The last aspect of the report I wanted to cover, which encapsulates, I guess, the entire report, is our Treasury strategy for the remainder of the financial year. So we are in an environment where debt has been higher than, our interest rates have been higher than usual over the last couple of years, and we are expecting that to come back as the Reserve Bank starts its cutting towards the end of the year. So the first part of our strategy is to remain within those lower permitted ranges of our Treasury policy for the amount of debt we have on fixed interest rates. We want to be able to have that flexibility to take advantage of those new rates when they do come down. The second part of our strategy for the remainder of the financial year is to look at entering into some new forward start interest rate swaps. What that means is that when we have some existing loans that are floating rate, we're going to be approaching financial institutions, entering into contracts to essentially turn that floating rate debt into fixed rate debt and lock in some interest rates for a couple of years. We do have some advice from PwC that shows that we can achieve some reasonably significant savings over the next couple of years by entering into those contracts. And we'll be looking at continuing to work with PwC, work with some financial institutions and get some pricing to make sure that if and when we choose to action those contracts, that we are achieving the best benefit for the ratepayer and for council. But I'm happy to take any questions on the contents of the report.
Thank you, David. Questions? Stu.
Thanks. I know I sent through ahead of this some questions and some aspects of what I'm used to seeing in terms of a Treasury report, and I've circulated that through to the team. And and one of those is a template that kind of provides a bit more information in terms of not so much saying that we're in policy, but actually showing what it looks like. So I might have a question, for example, what is our current liquidity ratio? Yep, we're in policy, but what's it look like? Do you have an answer on that one, David?
So our liquidity ratio with our benchmark in our long-term plan is 110%. Yep. We are currently at about 113%.
113.
113.
Okay. And how does that look going forward? So in 6 months' time, 12 months' time, in the sense that how's that shaping up?
We remain, based on forecast, we remain within policy for the next 2 years. We do, I guess it's always difficult to forecast too far beyond that. So, I mean, one way we have managed that risk is we've increased our committed facilities with our transactional banker by an extra 10 million to, I guess, give that additional liquidity as we grow bigger as a council. Yep. So it is something we actively manage. We are compliant at least for the next 2 years, and we are actively managing what that looks beyond that.
Yep. In terms of looking at the strategy, which I guess from these, which is something that I really like to see in terms of what's the plan. And you've articulated that in relation to what's happening out there at the moment in terms of interest rate levels and the forward look at those interest rates. Would it be fair to say that you're focusing a lot around primarily to try and achieve at least some certainty around LTP, weighted average cost of funds assumptions? So I think you mentioned right now we're looking at about 4.15%, and that's marginally lower than the LTP kind of assumption. I guess our LTP has an assumption going out for 10 years on a per year basis. Can you give an idea of what is that kind of weighted average expectation? Because I know from a look forward for this committee, it's very much around managing that quite material risk and influence on your OPEX. It's probably one of the biggest single items, which is, I guess, why we have Treasury inside this this committee. Are you able to perhaps look at the reporting on a go-forward basis, where we've got a lot of these things seen in numbers terms, so we can get a picture of what those figures look like on a go-forward basis?
Sure. So, I mean, benchmarking our actual weighted average cost of capital against the long-term plan assumption is something we do. So we, I guess we took a slightly more conservative approach when we prepared the LTP, given where the market was at the point in time, and there is a lot more opportunity for downside risk on that. And we're very, very happy to bring that to future committee meetings. I guess we benchmark not singularly against the LTP. We also benchmark against market, and we are, which is one of the reasons we are looking at those forward rate swaps to make sure that we don't just. The LTP is the LTP. It was adopted at the point in time, but we also want to remain current compared to market.
I know I sent a template through to you, which was a suggested template that I see in my travels amongst other councils on similar committees, and it does, and I know that information is there. It's freely available. Are we able to have or could I please ask as an action item that we design a new reporting template for the Treasury report?
Absolutely. So the presentation we had prepared was more in line with what you had suggested. So we'll make sure that future reports are more in that flavour that came through in your suggestion.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Are there other questions from the committee on that? So the action from here is basically the suggested template. You'll work on that, David, and that's the format we'll see coming forward. And from time to time, perhaps we'll see PwC here as our treasury advisors. I'm not sure of the frequency of that, whether it's annually or whatever. I think it would be quite good for this committee to. They've came to us, I think, last November-ish, but we should.
It was not long ago, but yep.
Yeah.
Not a problem.
Cool. Thank you. No other. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure that this question is relevant to this committee, but I'm going to ask it anyway, and you can decide whether it's not relevant. I'm curious to, we've got Rotorua and Rotorua, and we're letting the community pay off their septic systems or portion of it. How do we set those rates? Do we fix them or at the time that the loan is taken down, or do we, because I'm just concerned that if we lock them in at a high rate and interest rates are heading down. Could you explain that to me?
Yep. So when we set these capital rates that recover the capital costs of schemes, and council sets the rate, we generally set the rate, and that's the rate that applies for the period of that what we're looking to recover. So when we set the rate for 25 years, we look at what our internal cost of capital would be over that time, and we seek advice, and in this case we got advice from PwC, who advise us on what that long-term rate is, and we apply that to the calculation of that rate. And in this case it's been 6%, and so we've applied 6%. And the reason we do that is because we don't want to keep resetting the rate, because you need to consult on setting the rate. And so we set the rate once, and we take a conservative approach with regards to our internal cost of capital over that 25 years. And so that's how we do it. If we had have set this rate 2 years ago, it would have had a lower cost of capital, internal cost of capital, than what we applied now. But going forward, it is anticipated that 6% is roughly the stability, the middle point of where we expect rates to be over the longer term. So that's how we set that. Remembering we don't charge interest, we're not a financer. It's a internal cost of capital charge that we apply to the recovery of the scheme.
I might also add that customers have the option to not incur that finance charge by paying directly, and interestingly, we have seen quite a bit of uptake of the lump sum repayment on that particular scheme.
I think I'd like to have a conversation after this offline, but thank you.
Mayor Tapsell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. Just a question regarding fixing contracts and interest rates, because we had a really interesting presentation from PwC, which may be dated now, where they were signalling that interest rates were set to fall, which could be good. So while I do support moving from a floating to a fixed rate, I am mindful that in year 2 of our LTP, our debt and in particular our investment in growth is quite significant. So how long are we talking on fixed? And yes, while it may be a savings compared to the floating, if it's anticipated that the interest rates will continue to fall, I'm very sure these are things you are considering, but I'd also like to know what some of the key factors are that you are considering before you commit to that fixed contract.
So we consider the best option of fixing or floating every time we look to refinance or take up new borrowings. And I think if we just wind the clock back a little bit before probably when interest rates were probably at their historical low and leading into that, our strategy was around fixing as much as possible and as long as possible because of the rates that were available. And so we generally had the majority of our debt spread evenly across a 10-year window, so we had a similar amount renewing while taking into account the additional borrowing that we were taking for further investment. And so that was sort of our strategy. And we had probably a minimum level with regards to floating. And at that time as well, it was the pricing with regards to the attractiveness of long-term fixed was there. As those prices have changed and the uncertainty has changed, we've compressed that window of borrowing from 10 years and down to 7 now, and we've taken on more floating borrowing, which is showing in the graphs with regards to the different colourings. And the reason for that is that as the pricing changes, then obviously we're not locking ourselves into higher fixed term. It'll adjust with regards to the floating rate adjusting. And now we're looking to match some of that with regards to putting in interest rate swaps and hedges, because the market currently is pricing those in quite favourably against the floating rate, because many of the institutions are anticipating the Reserve Bank decreasing the OCR probably quicker than what maybe the Reserve Bank may be doing. And so we'll see a shift with regards to what the market conditions are, where it's indicative, but we do heavily rely on PricewaterhouseCoopers with regards to their treasury advice and leadership that they give us.
Thanks, Thomas. Does that answer your question? And we have Councillor Warry.
Kia ora, I think Stu and Mayor, you took up most of my questions, but I just have one. PwC, it's come up a number of times. Are they the only group we use for advice?
They are our preferred supplier, so we every 3 years we generally go out to market and do that. And so there are within New Zealand considered two of the big players. PwC is one of them, and Bancorp is the other. We've been with PwC for a number of years now, and really happy with regards to the proactive service that they give us.
So in that regard, Thomas, they provide a monthly report to you folk, and as and when required, there's more regular discussions around what's happening in the marketplace. Yep.
So there's monthly Zoom calls with the partner and the manager. We receive regular market updates and trends that they're seeing, and generic recommendations of where they would see organisations sit against their policy settings, and then we have those one-on-one meetings where they'll give us specific advice on us. All our data with regards to our borrowings and interest rates and terms are loaded into their dashboards, and so we have access to dashboards that maps out where our debt is, projected debts, compliance to the ratios, liquidity, all those sorts of elements. So we leverage their expertise and technology as much as we can.
Thanks, Thomas. Are there any other questions for David and Thomas on this agenda item? If not, no, thank you. So we can now move to 6.5, and I just want to check whether or not Audit New Zealand have joined. Well, Craig's not here for this item yet, but that's fine. I'm just wondering whether or not we just take a brief break. Audit New Zealand were going to join us at 2 o'clock. It's 2 minutes before. I'd just be keen that they're online when we go to the item. So 2-minute stretch break, like literally a 2-minute stretch break. Yeah. Robert, you've texted them, have you? Yeah. Oh yeah, cool. Well done. Thank you. And that, can I ask for a mover and seconder that the report draft Audit New Zealand Management Letter 2022/23 annual report be received? Mover, Councillor.
Itching to be mover and seconder.
Who was first?
I'm not sure, all three of them had their hand up at the same time.
Well, I saw Councillor Wang first, so moved by Councillor Wang, seconded by Councillor Waru. All those in favour, please say aye. 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 Take that as confirmed. I'll invite David Jensen to overview the report. Then I'll also invite David Walker from Audit New Zealand to speak to it as well, and then we'll take questions. Thank you. David is online, I presume. Are you there, David?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I
cool.
to push the button.
No,
I've been on for, well, I've been trying to get on for a little while, but I had the little circle of death which was going round.
Okay, good to see you. So firstly, David J, and then I'll hand over to you, David W. David J.
Sure. So this report covers audits feedback to governors based on the audit of the 2023 annual report, which we adopted a few months ago. Within this report, Audit give their findings as through the course of the audit process, and importantly, they also give some recommendations. So what this report covers, the attachment covers, is officers' feedback to those recommendations, and happy to take questions or pass over to David Walker for commentary on his report.
Thanks, David. So as you say, so in italics in the report under the heading management comment is the report from council management with respect to the recommendations raised by Audit. But in that regard, David Walker, just hand over to you in terms of if there's any specific comments you wish to make, and then we'll take questions. Thank you. You must be on mute, David.
Yes,
yep.
I did put it back on mute.
Yep.
I'm sure you didn't want any background noise, even though I am in the office. So thank you very much, Chair. The 23J was a long audit. We got there in the end. I think the management report identifies areas where there are areas of improvement. Typically, an audit will look at areas of improvement, but should I, and although I'll spend more time talking about areas of improvement, please don't let that completely override the effort that goes into an annual report, and dare say, you know, we've done the long-term plan as well, the amount of effort that goes in. So while I will focus on areas of improvement, from me, I would like councillors to recognise the amount of effort that goes into one of these things. So having said that, one of the two areas probably that could have the most impact, I think, is delivery. That's getting the stuff to audit, whatever that is. I use the word stuff very loosely. It's a range of things, but getting the audit information to audit. There's generally a backwards and forwards, you know, so you'll get us a list, we'll make a sample, we'll get it back to council. I think the response times is included in my loose comment of getting the stuff to audit. So if that can be improved, I think there will be quite a big impact on the timelines. Now, I mean, we've got to take into account things like COVID and people being sick, and, you know, we all have to do various courses and maternity leaves and all these sort of things. So it's not always as easy as just get it there on time. While I mention it as a headline, there's lots and lots of sub-points below that. I think the other major thing is QA reviews, quality reviews, and internal quality review. And that in itself also, similar to my first point, has multiple sub-points. You know, it's very easy to say, oh, just get someone to do a QA review. I mean, I can do a QA review over a medical journal. I won't know what the hell I'm doing, of course. But my point is, a QA review is not easy. You need to get the right combination of, you know, accounting expertise. Bear in mind you've got all those standards. If it's an engineering thing or an impairment matter, so it is a vast area and a very long answer to what is a good QA. Nonetheless, and accepting that it's not a simple one silver bullet. If not only you, I mean, there's many councils and other entities, organisations, including central government. If you can do a good QA process, it has multiple benefits, including we don't have to come back to council for multiple versions. It reduces the amount of audit time, and therefore there's that impact on costs. So those would be my two headline points. Chair, I think enough said. I think the rest of the detail is probably in the management report or the report to governors, which you've got.
Thanks, David. And the committee will note that later in our agenda item, we do have a report which is a specific review of the learnings and the recommendations around the annual report process. So some of that detail we can deal with later. And I see the management response with respect. I think some of those issues you've raised are about incorporating those recommendations into the 2024 annual report process. I don't know if either Thomas or David want to comment further on that with respect to sort of addressing those issues.
I think for us, and I think I'll come back as I agree with the statements with regards to ensuring the information is provided timely and queries are responded to quickly and QA, and I think we've talked in the past around some of the challenges that we've had in our organisation with regards to staff turnover and all those other elements. And so for us, on adoption of the annual report, a while ago, we did take a lot of learnings out of that, and in particular, one of the first things we did apply those to was the long-term plan. And it was very pleasing that all the work that went in with regards to working with audit, being proactive, making sure that our QA was there. And you'll recall we did, obviously get our audit opinion and our adoption of our LTP on time. And some of those same principles are now being applied as well as some of the other learnings going forward into this annual report, where the team is striving very hard to ensure that we meet our 31 October deadline.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. So Dave, hey, just a couple of specific questions from me. Firstly, of you, David Walker. In the report in section 3.1, your overall conclusion is the control environment is very elementary. I just wanted to understand the reason for that comment rather than being effective, and is that related to the points you're raising earlier in your discussion, or there are other matters with respect to what I'd call internal control that that you need to raise with us, or so I just really want to understand that in terms of that comment, because I don't, apart from the significant issues with respect to the annual report process, and there's a number of other recommendations later on, I just want to make sure that the reasoning behind landing on that conclusion.
Yes, to a lot of the comments, Chair, that you've mentioned, the items in the report, items carried forward, an internal control process is often limited by the number of people that you have. For example, small teams, you don't have the diversity of being able to do that step up which is common in sign-offs. If you have a look at the journal entries, say, the sign-offs and the controls around journals. So in a more sophisticated environment, you would have multiple automatic controls. The computer system would actually control it. You're just not given the discretion. Okay. And so that would become a far more sophisticated environment where you've effectively minimized or taken away a lot of the individual discretions. So yeah, so that lands on what one would call elementary or beginner. I've seen a number of internal audit reports, often done by the big four firms, and they talk things about immature, mature, advanced, and elementary would fit in with what they call as, I think I've seen the term learner or beginner. Yes. Okay. So hopefully that describes.
So to be helpful for the committee, if management were able to address all the specific points raised in the letter, in a year's time when we get this, that terminology might change?
It would change, but it would be more than just what's in here. You'd have to go back to your individual controls over banks, reconciliation of debtors, reconciliation of creditors, the aging of them, the process of collecting of them, the approval of your monthly accounts, etc., etc. So you would need to go in and look at the controls around all the different aspects of the organisation. But then that's then that's at the bottom. Then you go all the way up to the extent to which the monthly accounts are reviewed and compared to budgets, and how explanations are obtained, and that starts to fit more in that executive leadership team, CEO, audit and risk committee, governance controls.
So I guess the substance of my question, David, is that I just want to understand for this committee, there's a number of recommendations, management undertaking to address those. Just want to make sure that there are no other issues with respect to internal control or concerns that we should be focusing on. I'm hearing probably not, so we know what we need to work on. But just moving on, just with respect to matters raised previously, there's 15 items of which 5 have been closed. So there's 10 outstanding items still to address. I'm just, David and Thomas, keen to see a response with respect to those items. And the two I just want to understand in terms of this meeting is, one is around sensitive expenditure, that the policy hasn't been updated. So I'm really keen that that gets onto the work program. And secondly, there's a comment in here that there's differences between the ozone system and information maintained outside the system. Just want to understand what that refers to, and I guess, is that a significant issue that we need to be focusing on and needs addressing? So a couple of things there. One is keen to see a response offline to the 10 items still outstanding in terms of addressing those. But specifically sensitive expenditure, that comes back to this committee in terms of policy review, and in terms of that ozone system difference, is that a material issue or immaterial?
So first of all, I think the sensitive expenditure policy was reviewed by the exec and updated a few months ago, so I think that's been taken care of because it is an internal policy. So might not have been done in time with regards to this audit. I'm not too sure with regards to the ozone. We don't use ozone, and we haven't used ozone for a while, but there was obviously that period of transition at the time. So we switched over from ozone back in, obviously, May 2023. So I'll just have to confirm exactly what that comment refers to.
Okay, so maybe that's tied up.
So that dates back to the 2019-20 audit, which is when that system was used. So maybe that's
It
the
just
legacy
needs to be
comment. Yeah.
closed out, and maybe that's just an update. So this is a draft report, so maybe that just could be corrected. So if it's not an issue anymore, let's just be clear that that's the case, yeah?
So Council's actually just in the process of doing the soft launch of the contracts module across the organisation, and one of them is actually capturing the leases and so forth. So that's actually a piece of work that's currently underway.
Thanks, Thomas. But just going back to sensitive expenditures, that would be a policy that I would see coming to this committee, so you're comfortable that goes onto the work plan?
So it has, my understanding is that that's a policy, that's a staff policy. So I've approved that in my capacity as chief executive, but I don't see any issue with it coming to the committee for information.
Sorry to jump in, like I would see that as one of the policies, we talked about what policies this committee should have an overview. That would be one of the policies that I would expect the Audit and Risk Committee would actually see and understand.
That is the wish of the committee, yeah.
Well, yeah,
I'll leave it with my chief
maybe
executive.
we need an offline discussion about which those are. I wasn't aware that was an agreement of the committee So
I don't think we previously discussed it. I think at the last meeting, as part of the committee terms of reference, we discussed what policies should this committee actually look at. So I think that's something that's sitting on the work program.
Happy to have that discussion with regards to the forward work program, which we're about to have.
Thanks, Thomas. Other questions? Stu?
Yeah, it's a bit of a follow-on from your points, Chair, in relation to, and this to you, David Walker. If we step back and we're looking now towards the 2024 audit, and we think about our beginnings being the accumulative impact of previous recommendations and the status of those recommendations. Now, you've indicated the two that really give you the most concerns. Do you think, are we making progress in the trend towards dealing with those previous recommendations in a way that we're not just continuing to build a bow wave, especially in the urgent and necessary category?
Chair, do you want me to respond?
I just want to be clear, is that directed at audit?
Yep. That was, yeah, as I said, to you, David Walker.
Oh,
in
sorry.
terms of
Okay.
how are we tracking things? How are we going?
So it's early days. A lot of the, and dare say, I'll have a better idea, which this doesn't help you, next week when we have what we call a revalidation meeting internally, and the revalidation meeting summarizes effectively the interim. So all we've done at the moment is the interim.
Sorry, David, can I just jump in? The next item is around the plan for this audit. So your question, Stu, is more around, are we dealing with issues in terms of taking them off in terms of issues being raised by audit?
Before we come to that, it's nice to know what you currently feel in terms of our progress towards dealing, especially with legacy, items that have been there for years, in the sense that, are we making progress, David?
Yeah. I can't give you a yes and no answer right now, because where we are at the stage in the audit, we're not dealing really with some of the points that I made earlier. At the moment, we've done things like systems descriptions. So I'm not asking at that stage for a list or a set of accounts. The misstatements I talked about and the QA review that I talked about really has most applicability in the final audit. It does apply to the interim, and we'll see more of that in the pre-final. So where we get a list of, let me give you an example. If I ask you for a list of debtors, we reconcile that back to the we reconcile that back to the financial statements. At the moment, there isn't a financial statements. So at the moment, I would take it as a list, or I'd agree it to a general ledger. So there's far less opportunity to test.
Oh, okay. Sorry, David.
Until we get to the pre-final and the final audit.
Sorry, David. What I guess I was really kind of getting, this was more of a qualitative question, okay? And given that you've just come out of, post these reviews, you've just come out of an LTP audit process, I just wanting to get your view on the progress that we've made. I mean, that's very fresh. That's very, it's just occurred. Do you feel that there's been some movement towards some of these legacy issues being dealt with, please?
Once again, we're not comparing apples with apples. For example, let me pick Una. Was great. She, there was regular contact. She's got a different team around her. Greg. We don't deal with Greg normally in the annual audit on the numbers side. He's been involved in the past on the non-financial performance side, whereas through the LTP he also got involved with some of the financial side. So you're not really comparing like with like, but if you want to have a look at, I have done the draft management report, and I would dare say the draft management report shows that you have made progress. But until you can compare apples with apples, it's somewhat of a leading question.
Okay, sorry. Please indulge me, folks. No, I think it's really important, Mike. Thanks. Thanks, David. I mean, we were actually getting there, and that's been where I was going, because in terms of the comparing apples with apples, one of those key ones that you've mentioned is delivery, and that is essentially getting the data to audit. And so what I'm hearing is that potentially that has been better in the LTP process than what we've seen in this. And I think that for this committee, even though this committee doesn't actually look at the LTP, hey, we're all linked. Let's just understand we all want the same objectives and goals. We want to see this improvement. And so what I'm getting from you there, David, is that you're probably going to show in your draft report on the LTP that there's probably been an improvement on that delivery function, which is an organisational element. It is comparing apples with apples, in my opinion. But I think that's kind of given me a feel that we're on the right track.
And then what I'm hearing David say is once I've completed the interim, they'll be able to further update that. But okay, no, thanks, Stu. Do we have other questions for David? Councillor Waru?
Tēnā koe te chairmana ho tira. Thomas, David, thank you. And the other David too, kia ora, on TV. E mihi ana ki a koe. Just, you spoke a bit about the QA process and the need for, well, some things can be improved. Can you give us an example of what you meant by that?
So, for example, we would find documents. I mean, if we'd get another set of financial statements. Now, I really want to emphasize that they are complex documents. And when I look at a set of financial statements, I don't really, I mean, if I see a spelling mistake, well, I'll point it out. But I don't go looking for spelling mistakes. I often feel that the annual report is the entity's document, and it's very costly for everyone, if I'm looking for something like that. But I will look for, if you, in one place you say your depreciation is 20%, in another place you see that, I see the depreciation is 50%. You know, that doesn't make sense. If I see you've got an asset that I expect to have been written off in 3 years, and it's not, and I see there's only a little bit of depreciation in it, I will point that out. So those are the sort of things that a quality review would pick up. I shouldn't see conflicts within a document. I shouldn't see things that don't comply with the accounting standards. And councillor, you know, the accounting standards are a nightmare. You know, there's many instances accountants don't understand the accounting standards because, you know, they are voluminous. They really are.
Oh no, thank you. Think that's sufficient. I understand where your thought process is now. So thank you for that. And also to you, Mr. Chair, you know, English isn't my first language, but I think elementary can also mean straightforward. So, kia ora, I'll just put that one there with you. Kia ora.
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions, Councillor Barker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a small one. Thank you, David and Thomas. On page 7 of the report, it just alludes to that during the audit we were unable to have direct contact with elected members. In what situation would that have occurred, and what's that mean?
Chair, when we first started, I'm not sure what happened before, but normally audit would have, like we have now, you know, I have access to a meeting. Normally I would get invited to the whole Audit and Risk Committee meeting. I would be able to, you know, sort of pass comment, particularly if there was something like an audit report that's been adopted or something like that. When I first, and bear in mind 23 was my first year, things have moved on a lot since then, but when I first got involved, I didn't have that access. I only had public access, and hence the comment. But having said that, you know, that could have been quite administrative. You know, I don't know, changing people. I didn't go down to try and find the exact reason, but audit per se didn't have that access. It's completely changed. Here I am sitting chatting, and this is a formal meeting, but I'm having direct interaction with councillors.
Great, thank you. That answers my question. Thank you.
Yeah, if I might comment, obviously I've only been here a short time, David, but my understanding is that you're referring to a time when the terms of reference, and maybe not the terms of reference, but certainly the practice of the Audit and Risk Committee wasn't necessarily as broad-ranging as it is now. And I believe under the previous triennium there were rather more narrower focuses for the Audit and Risk Committee. And I believe you're referring to that time frame as in the previous triennium, as opposed to the current one?
I think the key point is that we've moved on. I think we've got much better engagement happening now, so it's positive.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So folks, are there any other questions? If there's not any other questions, let's just move to item 6.6, and can I have a mover that the report 2023-2024 audit plan be received? Councillor Kai Fong, seconded by Councillor Brown. All those in favour, please say aye. I will take that as confirmed. Thomas, do you want to introduce this report? No? David?
Through the Chair, this report covers Audit New Zealand's plan for the 2023-24 audit plan, sets out the areas of focus, sets out key dates for visits and deliverables, and perhaps David Walker might be best placed to comment on the contents of the audit plan.
Yeah, thanks, David J. So David Walker, is there any particular parts of it you wish to highlight for the committee?
Chair Candu, please interrupt me. I hate talking to people and everybody knows this already, you know, that whole to Newcastle story. So please just interrupt me. It's not rude. So what the audit plan is meant to represent, it's the audit team doing some initial work and saying, what are the risks for this audit? And things change, the environment changes. I mean, I don't have to mention Three Waters and it'll probably send a shudder through everybody's boots. But so things do change. So we as an audit team, we start off with that. This time around, we've also had the benefit of the LTP. We get input from the sector group, that's by both our Audit New Zealand sector group, as well as the OAG. So we chuck that into the pot, and then we have discussions with yourselves, obviously, to get councils. Things could happen at council that obviously doesn't replicate through the sector. And we put that together and we say, right, what are the areas that, you know, most likely could cause difficulty? What cause, we have a phrase of risk of material misstatement. What is the risk of there being a significant error in the accounts? And if there is, where are those risks likely to come from? And so we shortlist the most risky items. We put them into this document, and that effectively then, along with other things like sensitive expenditure and there's, you know, what's happening in the sector, but that creates effectively the foundation of the audit plan, and definitely includes, you know, what the council is doing. Whenever I have a draft audit plan, I normally sign it off as being, you know, sort of final, but it's not 100% final, because I then send it to you. Excuse me, that's still getting over COVID, which I had some months ago. And I normally say, here it is, but if there's anything that you believe has happened that is of a significant risk to the audit, please let me know. And this process now is just part of that. Why do I sign it off? Because normally it is final. It's not always final, but I sign it off also to indicate to you, the council, that we've been through the process. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. So it is about collecting risks from all over the place, from the different areas of shall I say, where we're most likely to get the information from, and then put it in this document. So that's the first thing I'd like to share. The second thing, which a lot of people who are not really close to or familiar with an audit process, is the concept of materiality. We certainly can't look at every single transaction. It would be impossible. And so we effectively work on a materiality figures, which says something along the lines, and I'm just putting this as simply as I can off the top of my head. If it's not material, then it's not important. If it's not important, it won't have an effect on my audit opinion. Therefore, I can do very little work, if any, on whatever that is. Council might have a different view, and that's fine. I would expect that. If I can give a real simple example, if you lost $10, that might be really important from council's perspective, from a rate perspective, but it's not going to affect my audit opinion. So we have and materiality in itself is quite a complex area. If you think of your income statement or you think of sensitive expenditure, the materiality for those areas needs to be quite a lot lower than the materiality we would use when evaluating your property, plant and equipment. If you look at the total value of your assets, it's massive. So if I used a very low level of materiality, my sample sizes would be huge and would just be impractical. So we have different levels of materiality which focuses on the appropriate areas. The overall materiality for the parent for Rotorua is 124 million. So that's the overall materiality. And we've got different tiers going down, and we have another type of materiality which we call clearly trivial. So clearly trivial is anything below 195,000. We would probably not even include it in our management report. So you can see there are different levels of materiality focusing on different aspects of the audit. I think.
So thanks.
I think I could leave it there,
Yeah.
Chair, but I mean, I'm happy to have a further and broader conversation around materiality. But it really for the non-accountants, if we used. Oh, can I add another thing? One of the things about two things about materiality. It helps us select sizes, and it helps us to evaluate any errors.
Okay, no, thanks, David. So the intent is just really so the committee understands the key risk areas that you've identified going into the audit, and that may change as you get in and actually start undertaking work, but also that the committee understands you do work to materiality. And when you say 195,000 being trivial, obviously if it related to sensitive expenditure or items like that, the threshold is much lower than 195,000. But in terms of the financial accounts, and if there's a misclassification between fixed assets, plant or motor vehicle, those sorts of things, that's the context for that conversation. So why don't we pause that there and just see if there's any points of clarification from the committee. And the other thing that's in the report is the timeline you're working to. So your team have already completed the interim audit, and the report does refer to 26 July being a date by which issues will be advised. I think I've seen one email, Thomas and David, on valuation matters that audit have raised, which presumably you're looking at and will respond and seek to address it early. So this is trying to be proactive of heading off at the pass any matters that might appear to potentially be an issue, that there's clarity between the parties. Can I just clarify, David, in terms of that date of 26 July, has the interim audit been completed? Any significant matters have been raised with the team, or that's still in progress? And when I say the team, the RLC finance team are still awaiting information of issues that you've identified in the interim?
Yes, unfortunately, Warren's been quite sick the whole of this week. And so we were meant to have a meeting the week before. We couldn't. We were meant to have it this week. He's been sick. So that's actually been postponed now to early next week. Okay, thanks, David. So in terms of the dates that are set out here, in terms of specifically audit starting and final clearance, et cetera, moving towards, adopting the council adopting the annual report by 31 October, at this stage, and it's a question firstly for Thomas and David, are we on track for these dates? And secondly, have they been signed off with audit? So that's locked and loaded in terms of an annual report process.
Yep, so we are on track with regards to these dates. David may recall we did have a meeting about a week or so ago with regards to the, I'm not sure, I thought my understanding was the interim audit was completed, but I think he was still working through a few elements, so we're not aware of any queries outstanding with us. So hopefully that has been closed off, and the team are working towards getting the draft set of accounts ready by the end of this month. I think for us it's been very good to receive this audit plan early. So for us, particularly around the focus areas, it's allowed us to focus the team into those aspects. And I know David in particular has been having, David Jensen has been having a lot of internal discussions with our teams, particularly around the fixed assets. That's while finance is the end point of the annual report. The organisation itself, with regards to its performance measures and asset data, they do the bulk of that work. So we're just honing that machine towards the dates that are available. For us, in the interest of transparency, we are having to have a discussion with Audit next week, and we've scheduled a meeting for next Friday to talk about the reval of the wastewater treatment plant in particular. It is obviously going through a significant upgrade at the moment, and so we need to have a discussion regarding what's the appropriate revaluation during a time of significant change and what the impact will be there, and we'll have a good discussion on that next week. And I think that's the only real significant issue that we see that we're having to get on board with, and so we're just being proactive about that, and hopefully we'll have a good discussion next Friday on that topic.
Thanks, Thomas. Are there any other...
Chair, can I mention that in terms of the 26th of July, that email I sent, and in fact I just went in and just checked that it was, but that email I sent was the 26th of July. So while that email's gone, I think my comment about Warren being sick is we just haven't had the opportunity to close out everything.
Okay.
So there may be nothing more coming, but when I'm able to meet with Warren and we meet as a team, then there might be something added to it. But certainly of the key issues was that email I sent out on the 26th. David.
Thanks, David.
Thomas was referring to.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee with respect to the audit plan? Stu.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, it's going to be a slightly circular question, but David Walker, again, in terms of a qualitative feel for things, it's my understanding that the process of the LTP audits have brought about some new areas of focus by Audit New Zealand that have led to some more increase in qualifications, especially around the funding of capital works. And in terms of that, are you seeing anything on the horizon that could be an area of change, as you alluded to? Things change. The audit plan, things do change during it, and from the learnings that you folk have in relation to what you're going through and what you've been through with a number of councils that have had their LTPs audited. And as a heads up for us, is this anything we should be really putting some attention to, in your opinion?
Paying attention to, well, there's the valuations, so I won't go into that. I mean, the email's there, and that would be repeating. The LTP is quite a different audit from an annual audit, and you made reference to qualifications and funding. So the qualification in Rotorua's LTP was around external funding, and the LTP included funding for the museum.
Sorry, David, could I just clarify? I don't believe our audit opinion had any qualifications on it.
No, it was not qualified.
You're unqualified here, but I know for some others there has been, and that's why I'm interested.
So we did have a matter of emphasis pointing to the museum funding, which was obviously covered in our significant assumptions, but I make it very clear we do not have a qualification.
David, you picked up that comment. So it's a matter of emphasis in the audit opinion, not a qualification?
Yes, no, that's right. Sorry, wrong use of terminology. We often refer to a modified opinion as being any change to the opinion, and you're absolutely right. Being more correct, it was an emphasis of matter, and it was around the museum. The large amount was the external funding that was going to come for the restoration of the museum. And so that is forward-looking and is saying, you know, that there was insufficient support to say that you're actually going to get the money. That doesn't.
I do need to clarify for those listening, the museum seismic strengthening is fully funded, as we've said to our community. What the audit director is referring to is the exhibition funding, which we've clearly highlighted in our long-term plan, and we've told our community we are seeking further funding. I just need to clarify that.
Thanks, Thomas. Stu, can I just understand, the purpose of your questioning, is there issues emerging in the LTP which may impact ongoing annual reports? Is that the... Yeah. So that's the question that's really been asked. Has anything emerged in terms of the LTP process that you should be highlighting with us as, I mean, you've already got your risks and issues listed. That's just so I understand, Stu, that's your question? Yeah.
It's not just with us, it's with, you know, I mean, you Audit New Zealand and you getting all the feedback from all the audits you're doing with local government, and are you getting any sense that there could be a change towards some areas of focus that's not currently on this audit plan?
Yep.
i.e. it's just giving us a heads up.
Yeah, I mean, Chair, I don't like answering such vague questions, because then if anything arises, I'm all of a sudden told, but I asked you this question and you said there was nothing.
No, I think it's just if there's anything at the moment that's emerged. I don't think this has been locking and loading. It's...
So do I know of anything specific that, you know, that's going to impact the 24J? Not that has arisen from the LTP, not that I'm aware of. It's also very early days, because I think only about half the councils have adopted their LTP, so we haven't yet had a consolidated sector feedback. But am I aware of anything? No, I'm not. One thing I think that is going to affect all councils is when the ISO 600 revised comes in. That's the standards. That's the auditing standards around group accounts, group annual reports, and that's going to have replications throughout the sector.
So will that impact the 24J audit, or is that a future thing coming up with it for us?
Both.
So it will affect the 2024 audit?
Yes, it will, but as I said, not as much. The big effect will first take place in the 25 audit.
Okay, so just...
Thanks, David.
Yep.
Look, thanks, David. And look, I wasn't trying to put you on a quantitative spike here. I was really looking for a qualitative, and we've got there. Thank you very much indeed. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Stu. Are there any other questions from the committee? If not, I'm seeing there are no other questions, so I'll take that item as confirmed. So at this stage we can now move into public excluded. There are a number of items to consider, and the reason for going into public excluded is set out in each of the items. So I don't necessarily think I need to go through those in detail, Una, unless there's anything specifically you think I need to highlight before I seek approval from the committee to exclude the public on the grounds contained in section 48(1) of the Local Government Act, Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act. So can I have a mover for that? Councillor Waru, a seconder, being Councillor Barker. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. So, and I will note that David Walker from Audit New Zealand is staying on for the first item, and we'll have Craig Fisher joining us, but I think we just need to pause and...
Take a pause while we